All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for having me here today. I'm really happy to be back with Legacy Family Tree webinars again. I'm interested by these survey results. 73% of you said your ancestors arrived in Massachusetts before 1700. So that's telling me, Jeff, that maybe you need to do a colonial Massachusetts or a colonial New England webinar based on those numbers. I'm really surprised by that. I thought we would have had more people with Irish or Italian immigrants that arrived in the 19th or 20th century. So I was a little bit surprised by that. Not really as surprised by when people left Massachusetts, because come 1800, people really started to leave. We had 45% of you gone by 1799, and then another 50% gone by 1850. So that kind of fits in with what we know about what's going on in Massachusetts. And then in terms of the ethnic groups, well, we had 32% Irish and 86% other. So I'm wondering if the 86% other is people who are identifying English as an ethnic group. I wasn't actually including
Yes,
that.
Marian, a lot of them have written, yeah, they've written England,
yeah.
Most of the people.
Yeah, I had actually put that as one of the options, but then I thought it was kind of funny, you know, that to put the English as an ethnic group. So anyways, I should have left it in there. Anyways, so let's get started. In the next hour, I'm going to be giving you a broad overview of genealogical research in Massachusetts. And I'm going to cover nearly 400 years of Massachusetts records. But keep in mind that each of the subjects that I touch on could have their own 1-hour presentation because there's that much information about genealogical records in Massachusetts. The great thing about this state is that there are so many records and they go back so far in time. There's no cutoff point like you hit with New York or something like that. You can go back to the 1600s when you're doing research in Massachusetts, and that's one of the great things about doing research in this state, but it's also one of the overwhelming things about doing research in this state because there's just so much available. That said, this talk is geared toward people who don't live in Massachusetts and people who need to rely more heavily on internet resources. So that's not to say that there aren't tremendous records available that aren't online. It's important to remember that doing on-site research in manuscripts is just as important as doing online research. But I have to recognize that many of you don't have easy access to Massachusetts. So I'm going to focus on giving you the tools that you can access now. And then I'll just, try to encourage you to make a trip to Massachusetts someday in the future if you get the chance. And when you do, don't come in the winter, okay? All right. I'm going to start off with just a really, really brief history of Massachusetts, and much of this is going to be review, but it kind of lays the groundwork for where we're going. So, of course, 1620, the Mayflower sails from England, Plymouth Colony is established. Key date in Massachusetts history. In 1630, John Winthrop establishes the Massachusetts Bay Colony at Boston. Now, the reason why I point this out is because when I was first getting involved with genealogy and learning about history, it was not really clear to me, all these different colonies. I hate to admit that, but it's true. So you have got the Massachusetts Bay Colony at Boston, the Plymouth Colony. They're two separate colonies with separate leadership and separate jurisdictions, just like Connecticut Colony, New Haven Colony. So at this very early time, these are all sort of independent governing bodies. So just keep that in mind, that you don't want to think in these early times that it's all just Massachusetts, okay? Now, another thing that I find can be particularly confusing are the term Pilgrim and Puritan. Pilgrims were separatists. They believed that in order to achieve what they wanted to with their religious beliefs, they were willing to leave the Church of England. Puritans, on the other hand, believed in reform within the church. So the Pilgrims were the folks that were at Plymouth, and the Puritans were the ones who were in Boston and went off to Connecticut. And John Winthrop, who was the governor of the Mass Bay colony, he was very fearful that if his people were exposed to those separatists, that he might lose some of them to Plymouth Bay colony. And in fact, that did happen. So it's a very subtle difference, but keep that in mind, that there is a difference between the term Pilgrim and Puritan, and the Pilgrims were in Plymouth and the Puritans were in Boston. 1691, we get the Royal Charter for Massachusetts. So this spells the end of Plymouth Colony, Plymouth Colony. And also at this point, Maine is part of Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is very large at this time. Just a little bit more with history, and this is relevant to most of you, 73% of you who are listening today. The American Revolution looms large in Massachusetts history. There were key historical events happening in Massachusetts. If you had ancestors in Massachusetts prior to 1800, it's very likely that some of them could have been involved with the Revolution. So it's important that we take into consideration what historical events happened during the Revolution, how that impacted our ancestors, and what records were created as a result, and the transition from a colonial government to an independent United States, Massachusetts government. So we've got the Tea Party in 1773, the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775, and then the ratification of Massachusetts as a state in 1788. Now, before I even start digging into genealogical resources in Massachusetts, I'm just going to put these two books out there right at the front. I think it's really important that you understand the social history of Massachusetts, especially if you have Revolutionary War ancestors. Any ancestors that were in Massachusetts at a particular time period, you really need to understand that time period in order to put your ancestor in context, but also to understand what records are going to be available to you, because even though we have great records in Massachusetts, you will hit brick walls. Understanding the history is going to make you more aware of what resources you can use to skirt around those brick walls, because there are tremendous resources, just people don't always dive deep enough into certain archives and such that I'm going to tell you about today. So in order to get around that first issue with social history, I would recommend a book called Massachusetts, A Concise History. And this is the book that I have, and it's just a nice way to get your hands around Massachusetts from the beginning to the 20th century. So it's a good overview, but it's not overwhelming. It's not of epic proportions. So that will lay the groundwork. And then the other book, of course, is the Genealogist Handbook for New England Research, which is put out by the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And this is your guide to the genealogical resources in New England. And it's going to break down all the records geographically. So depending on where you're specifically looking, it will tell you what records are available and where you need to go to find them. Now, this is the 5th edition, and I spoke to the folks at NEHGS this morning, and they tell me that it will not actually be available until March. So don't buy this book right now, because if you do, if you go online, you'll end up buying the older version, and the older version is so far out of date, you will cry if you buy that. Wait until March, get this new book edited by Michael Leclerc, and it's going to be great. I can't wait until it arrives. So these are the two books that are going to be the foundation of your research in Massachusetts. And you can get them from the library. You don't have to buy them. Okay, here's the outline of what we're going to cover today as we look at Massachusetts research. I'm going to talk about archives and access, where the materials are and how you're going to get to them. Then we're going to look at genealogical resources specifically. After that, I'll go into some miscellaneous topics such as changing borders, migration and immigration, and also African Americans. That's a topic that I like to cover in research, so I like to include that whenever I give a talk. There are 3 forms of access to records. You can access them online, using microfilm, or in person. Now clearly, I'm gearing this toward online research today. However, between the combination of online research and microfilm, which most of you should have access to at least within a couple hours, there should be a family history center nearby. Between those 2 accesses alone, you should be able to cover a real lot, a good majority. I hesitate to say that, but you should be able to cover a lot of Massachusetts records just with those 2 options. Now, of course, not everything is online or in microfilm. Some things still need to either be done in person or by hiring somebody to go in person for you. But Massachusetts has done a terrific job of making their records available. A lot of items have been digitized, and many, many more have been microfilmed. So you do have fairly easy access. You just need to know what's available, and you need to go looking for it. All right, so let's start with major online portals. Now, online portals are the places that are good to start with. They're where you're going to go to learn about Massachusetts, to learn what records are available to you, and also, look for databases and actual information where you can retrieve information on your ancestors. So the first one is the New England Historic Genealogical Society. That, and I will probably refer to that as NEHGS or American Ancestors for the rest of this talk, just because it's shorter. That is the oldest operating historical genealogical society in the United States, and it's located in Boston on Newbury Street. And it is not only an online portal, but it's a physical place as well, but we'll touch on that part a little later. This website, which is called AmericanAncestors.org, has tremendous resources for anyone who's researching either Massachusetts or New England and beyond, but we're going to stick with New England today. Not only do they have databases online, but they have a learning center online. So if you're just looking at Massachusetts for the first time and you're trying to get a handle on what's available, you can go straight to their learning center and read really informative articles by many of the genealogists that you've heard of. So it's a great place to start. Now, the Massachusetts State Archives, there's a photo here of that website. Now, yes, that many people perhaps think of the archives as a place where all those manuscripts are held, and that's true, but they have tremendous online resources as well. As you can see from the screen, they have some online databases. So they've got the Massachusetts Archives collection, which is really strong in the area of the majority of the people listening to this talk. So 1799 and earlier is really their strength, and they have a database there which is a catalog of their collection. They also have passenger manifests online that are searchable and vital records. But beyond that, they also have very good guides about what is available at the Massachusetts State Archives. So that is another great place to start. And your focus from the Massachusetts State Archives will most likely be the earlier years that you're researching. So I'd say 1850 and earlier is going to be the Massachusetts State Archives focus. So the earlier you get, the harder it gets. That's going to be the #1 place that you're going to go. Now, the Family Search Wiki is a wonderful resource that I'm exploring more and more these days. It's kind of like Redbook, Ancestry's Redbook, which has all 50 states. It's divided geographically and then by county, and it gives an overview of what records are available, and then it drills down to the town level. Well, that's what Family Search Wiki is turning into. And this is a volunteer-based website where people contribute information. Well, if you go to the homepage for Massachusetts, there's a tremendous amount of information, and that's a really great place for you to start, especially if you're not really familiar with Massachusetts research. Even if you are, if you go there, you'll probably find some